Hey class, Professor Banker here. Going to talk a little bit, give a sort of a response to your reading reflections dealing with utilitarianism. The prompt was dealing with utilitarianism in animal testing, utilitarianism in eating meat. And I think this is kind of a helpful exercise to see how a utilitarian would think through these various moral situations. So I want to say a couple things that are repeat, but we have to be clear on them. Utilitarianism does not represent a unified set of conclusions about moral issues. What I mean by that is all utilitarians are not in agreement about the death penalty, or about abortion, or about eating meat, or about animal testing. Utilitarianism is not a universal set of conclusions about issues. Instead, utilitarianism represents a way of reasoning, a way of thinking through moral issues, and a way of coming to moral decisions. So two utilitarians might disagree with each other about animal testing. What makes them both utilitarian is that they thought through the process in similar ways. They focus on consequences. They're trying to see who's being helped, who's being hurt, how are they being helped, how are they being hurt, does this maximize overall consequences, right? Those are the questions they're both going to ask themselves. But in the end, one might say animal testing increases good consequences overall. The other says animal testing does not, right? But they're still asking the same questions. And so utilitarianism is a way of reasoning, not a universal set of conclusions. Now, it is a hard universalist theory because if you're a full-blown utilitarian, you think for every moral dilemma, for every moral decision, you should use utilitarian logic. This is the right way to do it, right? So in that way, it's a utilitarian or sort of a universalist view. So let's talk about utilitarianism as it relates to animal testing. In the first example where you're doing testing on animals for cancer research, right? The utilitarian wants to say animals have to be counted. They matter because they can feel pleasure and pain. Many higher functioning animals can feel scared and have psychological trauma as well as physical pain. We have to count that. Now, we don't have to count animals equal to humans. Human pain matters more. Human suffering and psychological distress matters more, but animals still count. We shouldn't kill animals for fun. We shouldn't kill animals for no good reason, right? Because they do matter. But when we're testing on cancer, a utilitarian is going to ask the question, if there's a good chance that this research will lead or eventually lead to steps toward curing cancer, I think that most utilitarians are going to say the animal testing is okay. Yes, we're going to kill animals. Yes, we're going to cause them the greatest possible harm. But in the end, we might cure certain forms of cancer that will save human lives, and every generation, more human lives will be saved. Untold numbers. How many humans have been saved by the polio vaccine? Every single generation, thousands and thousands and thousands more are saved. So as the future extends, the number keeps increasing. So if we could do something with cancer research, we might be able to save untold number of lives. So I think the utilitarian is going to be okay there, right? As long as there's a good chance, as long as it's not flippant research on animals, research that has very little chance of helping with the fight on cancer. But as long as there's at least a reasonable chance, I think they're going to be okay, most of them. When it comes to Revlon, though, the utilitarian, I think most utilitarians are going to take a different track here. We're causing the greatest harm to some animals, killing them. Others, we're spraying things in their eyes. We're putting stuff on their skin. We're causing them great pain, right? If you've ever seen animal testing, it's horrible, right? We're testing for Lysol products to make sure they're safe. They're spraying it all over the animals, or with lipstick or shampoo. I mean, it's not a pleasant thing to be doused with chemicals, right? So we're causing animals this great harm, and the only benefit is a minor convenience, right? Better lipstick. So the amount of pain we're causing is much greater than the amount of benefit, especially since there are so many lipstick options available to women, and there's so many other things that they might be able to do, right? The utilitarian, I think most utilitarians are going to be very skeptical to say, okay, let's hurt animals for lipstick. Now, there could be some exceptions here. Like, let's assume that Revlon employs millions of people tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. And without this new product, they might go out of business and people will lose their pensions. And we might have to factor in unique circumstances, some of that and say, well, maybe we've got to do this in order to really save the company, which provides such a huge good with regard to the country and employment and lots of other products that are very beneficial. So there might be circumstances where the utilitarian would think differently. But if it's just a matter of hurting animals for a better product that might help maximize profits a little bit, I think they're going to be opposed. I hope you're seeing the way a utilitarian would think through a situation. I want you to be able to get inside the mind of a utilitarian, right? A couple of questions they always ask, right? Who's going to be affected? How are they going to be affected? When we look at the numbers, is the benefit outweigh the cost? Something that I should note that you need to be aware of, though. Utilitarianism is not a simple democracy. It's not a popularity contest. So if we had a room full of 100 people and we're like, okay, how many of you would like to have 4 pieces of chocolate cake? Like 80 people out of the 100 raised their hand. How many people don't? And 20 people raised their hand. Okay, well, we have 80 people that want this, so here, the utilitarian wants to say, well, wait a second, 80% might want this, but if it's harmful in the long term, right, if this is going to be detrimental, then I don't care what the majority says. We have to do what will maximize good consequences for the whole, right? If 70% of the population is like, we want free food, we want free housing, we want the government to take care of us, a utilitarian says, well, it's not a popularity contest. Maybe that will help. Maybe 70% of the people will be happy. We'll be happy if we did this. But long term, this is unsustainable. Long term, this will lead to the demise of our economy. Long term, this will lead to bad consequences. The utilitarian is going to say, well, I don't care if that's what 70% of the people want. What will actually maximize overall consequences? So do not think that utilitarianism is a simple majority vote, right? 100 people will be made happy with free cable, and that can only happen if they steal it from 2 of their neighbors. We help 100, we hurt 2. But if we set up a precedent of stealing, the utilitarian says, right, it's not going to maximize happiness overall. It's going to be a bad thing for society overall. And so even though 100 people get free cable, it's not up to a vote. It's not a simple majority. It really is, can we calculate and figure out what will be best for the most people overall? It's not a selfish theory. I can't think of myself to the exclusion of others. I can't think of my family as being more important than others. But instead, I am one, my son is one, my wife is one, my neighbor is one, the stranger is one, my enemy is one. Every human counts as one, and no more than one. So I have to figure out who's being helped, who's being hurt. If doing something that hurts me and my family will actually increase the amount of good consequences overall, then that's what I have to do, right? So let's talk about eating meat. This was something that many of you said the utilitarian would say was okay. There's definitely disagreement amongst utilitarians on this issue, but many utilitarians, many say that eating meat, at least in first world countries like ours, is immoral. And here's why. You're causing the greatest possible harm to an animal, death, for what in our country is really just a convenience. It tastes good, right? We have it readily available in our department stores and, in our grocery stores and in fast food restaurants and where we go to eat. Meat is just all around. It's what we grew up with. It's a natural part of our diet, and so we eat it. But it brings me pleasure to eat meat because it tastes good, but it's causing the greatest possible harm to the animal, and the utilitarian wants to say those don't add up. Because places like Europe and the United States where food is readily available, you can be perfectly healthy and be a vegetarian. You can be perfectly healthy and be a vegan. I know lots of people, right? There's been lots of studies done. You can get your protein and you can get your energy and you can do all that without eating any meat, okay? So because of that, meat becomes a luxury and we like it because we like it, but it's not really necessary for our survival. So again, it's a convenience test because it tastes good and we like it, but you're causing the greatest possible harm to the animal, and that doesn't add up. Now this would be different if you're in a place where eating meat is necessary. Certainly early on, when there's not food abundant the way we have it now, and we don't have sources, we don't have like access to complex proteins and other things, meat is a necessary part of the diet. At that point, the utilitarian says, fine, right? If you're in a country where food is scarce and you got to eat meat to survive, that's okay. If you go back in ancient history, right, meat was necessary, that's fine, right? Humans matter more than animals. But in our country, when meat becomes a luxury, something we don't need but we like, it becomes immoral because we're doing the greatest possible harm to an animal. That's the utilitarian reasoning. I'm somewhat convinced by this. I eat meat, and so normally I just feel guilty, right? Because I don't have, personally, I don't have a good moral argument for why it's okay for me to eat meat. I've tried to come up with them. I don't have one in my context. A good moral argument other than I like it, I prefer it, it tastes good. Those are not moral arguments, right? So I'm curious what you think. Is there a good moral argument why it is okay to eat meat? Why it's appropriate and right, and maybe even what's best, right? Because I think morality strives for what is best, not just what is permissible. And so I'm curious. So feel free to respond to this, any part of it. I hope you're enjoying the section on utilitarianism, and I look forward to getting to know you guys better online.